This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to Season 12 of the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine. I just wanted to give you a quick note to let you know that all the episodes, just about all the episodes of this season, were recorded around the summer of 2024. And as a result, there have been world issues that may have been referenced or situations in these episodes that might seem laughably out of date now. If that's the case, now you know why. I just wanted to give that quick disclaimer. And now, on with the show.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming back a returning guest, and that is Frank Schildiner. Frank, how are you doing today?
Very good. How's it in Japan right now?
It is unbelievably rainy. My morning classes were canceled yesterday because of torrential downpour, and it is still raining now. And typically the rainy season doesn't start until July, but it looks like we're getting it a little bit early this year.
Oh, lucky you.
Not so much, unfortunately. But today we're talking about an interesting movie. We are talking about Ring Zero, which was just released as Ring Zero in the US, but in Japan it was also released with the subtitle Birthday. And it is a prequel to, of course, the 1998 international success Ring. And this is basically the origin story for Sadako, who's the main villain throughout the series. But before we jump too much into this movie, why don't you talk a little bit about your history with this franchise in general?
I came into it from the American side originally. I hadn't been paying too much attention, even though about J-horror was getting very big, obviously, when the American version started. And I watched the American version with Naomi Watts, and I found it kind of unsatisfying. I had moments I appreciated, but I realized there was something missing. So I actually took the time out to pursue the Japanese version, and I found how much more superior it was. Then I took the steps to actually read the books. I mean, I even have Birthday right here, the American version of it, the short stories. Ring Zero is based on Lemonheart, which is one of the three stories in this book. I became a fan of Koji Suzumi and his work, and I actually, every time a new Sadako story comes out, I immediately go after it. And well, I've been kind of unhappy since the first two, but okay, it's, it is what it is. I just found the whole concept a great learning tool too. I learned a lot about Japanese ghost stories and curses. So yeah, it was quite a way to find my way into it, and it's become pretty much one of my daily parts of my life. I have all of them.
Very cool. So I also came to it through the American version, and I've kind of gone on a journey with the American version. At first I loved it the first time I saw it, and then after that I went and I sought out the Japanese one. And when I saw the Japanese version, my reaction was also kind of similar to yours, where I'm like, oh, this is so superior to the American version. But a few years ago, I did have the opportunity to talk about, and kind of like I actually, it was actually for a class. I was doing a lecture, and I thought, well, let me do a lecture on the American version, the Japanese version of the Ring. And what I found watching them back to back is a really interesting exercise, because you can really see how much care Gore Verbinski and his whole team put into actually adapting that story into an American context. Whereas if you look at something like The Grudge, you don't have that same kind of translation. It is just very haphazard, and it's just they take this very Japanese story and they just basically drop American characters into it, and it doesn't fit together. And same thing, One Missed Call, which god awful piece of crap that movie
Oh,
was, and
terrible.
and I
Dark
haven't
Waters.
Dark Water. I haven't seen Dark Water or Pulse, but from what I understand, like they also just did not understand what the
They
assignment
did.
was. Yeah. And so, but, and so and then a few years ago, I think it was actually the first time we had another guest on this show outside of the first regular format guest, I should say. When we did an episode spotlighting both Ring and The Ring, and it is a really interesting exercise to watch them back to back, and I think that it is a much better remake than I think a lot of people give it credit for.
What is one of the most superior remakes of an Asian product I've ever seen. The There was an attempt to do the same thing with Korean theater and Korean movies through Old Boy and other things. And again, they miss the point. They take the smallest part of the concept and just throw an American into it or an American situation. Gore Verbinski actually he translated what it would to an American audience, and it did absolutely make sense. It's just, I don't know, something in me told me there was more there. There was something superior, and that's why I prefer the Japanese. I don't have any dislike of the two American versions. The ones that followed like the Japanese versions very, very poorly. But Naomi Watts did a great job, and they had a very, very impressive cast in that. And Gore Verbinski definitely kept many of um, the more frightening elements that of the actual videotape of the setup, but the Japanese version just had something a little smarter. And also Japanese movies and most Asian movies, they have a willingness that American movies don't, of allowing a scene to be quiet and set the tone without having to have the talk or the explanation. There were moments in the original two, well, it's really three, but we're just going to forget about Spiral. um, that two people are sitting in a room looking at something or watching something or just in a moment, and the only noise that is there is the background noise of the area. It's not talking, and it's not long explanations to explain every detail. And one thing that I actually appreciate about that I learned from seeing these two movies and then following it is the way curses are viewed in Japan, probably Korea too. I can't really speak for that. In an American movie, when a ghost or a curse hits somebody, it's all about finding the explanation and finding the secret to solving it forever. Whereas in the Japanese view, it's about survival. And sometimes survival at other people's expense, which is the exact opposite to the way a Japanese person is supposed to think. And there's a brilliance to that. There's an absolute brilliance to, I don't think I'm spoiling the ending of the original Japanese version, and it's in the American too, of how they saved the two main characters, how they saved them in a Japanese setting. This was survival at the expense of others, which is the exact opposite to the way you're supposed to behave. And I found that absolutely amazing and something that I wish more people did.
No, I think that's a really good point, and that is something that I've discovered from living here so often and lecturing with Japanese classrooms and all that, is the difference in viewpoints. Whereas America is a much more the West in general is a much more individualistic culture, whereas Japan and most Asian cultures too tend to be more collective. And yeah, that's a really good point about the survival act, where it betrays that cultural norm, whereas instead of just trying to save everybody, you're just focused on saving yourself, even at the expense of other people. I thought that was a really good way of putting that. Um, excuse me. And looking at now, my familiarity with most of the Ring franchise, it is oh, excuse me. It is only focused on the books, on the movies, I should say. I've never read any of the books. I've never read any of the manga. I know there's also been some TV stuff as well. There is, in fact, the original movie was actually a made-for-TV movie. In fact,
Yes, it was.
back in 1995, which apparently I just found out is the one that is the most accurate in terms of translation. Now, have you seen all the Ring films and TV shows and all that?
I have, and I've actually out of the way to even see a Korean remake of it
Mm.
as well.
That was with Dona
They,
Bai, right?
yes, and I found that by a lot of looking. I actually kind of became insane on the subject. I could say it pretty honestly. I showed you the one book there. There's three more sitting over there. The others in the series. I have also Dark Water by the same author in the other room. I'm reading it now for the second time. I actually was trying to go out of my way, and I even saw the American versions as well as the 3D versions, which God help me, I'll never watch again. Those are just dreadful. And Sadako versus Kayako, which was as bad as it sounds. But for some reason, I think it was probably during COVID that because I was stuck inside, that I became so attached to finding out all the details of this concept as well as how Sadako reacts in different ways. I have read the mangas. I don't own them, but I would like to one day. I read those online, and I even saw some fan projects done on it. And there's a really, really funny one. Two really funny videos I saw. One is um, actually three now. I just thought of one. There was one that has all of these people walking down the street, and like a guy is walking down the street and he sees some guy coming forward looking really angry. So he goes to the other side. The angry guy's walking down the street and he sees Jason from the Friday the 13th movies coming down. Jason's walking down, and then there comes Sadako. So that was just, it made me laugh that he ran away from her. Something along those lines. I'm probably not quite accurate on it. There was another time where Sadako showed up at a Japanese baseball game as a part of an exhibition. That was really funny. I watched that. And the final one, there's an Indonesian illusionist, the Great Rihanna, I believe is her name. She does like horror based um, uh, magic, and she's appeared on Asia's Got Talent, America's Got Talent, and Britain's Got Talent, and scares the heck out of everybody. She dresses kind of like Sadako, and she even does an illusion at one point that's exactly like it. It's brilliantly done. It's all based in horror. You can find them online. So I guess I kind of became a serious hardcore fan based on what I'm hearing from myself now. I hadn't taken the time to analyze it until now.
Definitely sounds like you've definitely gone deep down the rabbit hole on those. Like for my part, I've only seen the first two American movies. I've seen Ring for the Japanese film. I've seen Ring and Ring 2, and now Ring 0. But I had never seen oh, you've got the DVD there. But I've never seen Spiral, Razen, and I've never seen any of the more recent ones like Sadako 3D, Sadako versus Kayako, just titled Sadako 1, Sadako DX, or even Rings, the 2017 American version. I haven't seen any of those, and my basic understanding is that I'm not missing much by having not
You're
seen
not
those.
missing anything. Nothing. Don't even. Honestly, if you have nothing to watch
Mhm.
and there's nothing to do and there's nothing you have on your mind, go on Tubi, and almost all of them are there, and just let it go. And if you miss half of it because your kids come up or there's something going on at the same time, you'll find you didn't miss anything. It's not worth it. They're bad. Spiral was actually made between Ring and Ring 2, and it was so bad they don't acknowledge it, and they made Ring 2 instead. So
Yeah, that was
really,
an interesting exercise because the Ring was already a pretty popular franchise by the time they made that first movie in terms of the novel, the the manga, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure. I think the manga came later, but the novel was
yes.
already pretty popular at that point. So, and there is Ring is the first novel, and then Spiral is the second novel. So they decided, well, let's make these back to back, and then we'll release them pretty much around the same time and double our profits. And it didn't exactly work out that way. Like you said, Spiral is basically kind of, been relegated to the ash bin heap of history.
Yeah, you can see it if you want. It's on Tubi. It's been on Tubi for a couple of years. I only really watch Fire Stick and all that. My Fire Stick, my Amazon. So I'm always watching movies. Hi to your kid back there. I see the outline. Um, and uh Tubi, every time Tubi, is on my Fire Stick, it'll have the list of things to, choose from, and there sits Spiral like almost every time. And also with Ring Zero is another one that is also on there. Ring Zero is superior, but not by a ton, but it is superior.
Well, that's a good transition into talking about this movie because Ring is still the gold standard. I think in the both the Japanese and the American version, I think that first movie in both cases is the gold standard and probably the best two out of the whole franchise as a whole. Ring 2 is interesting, but it's not that great. I mean, I thought it was okay. It was good, but it wasn't it definitely didn't have the same kind of punch that either the American or the Japanese original had. And and then we look at Ring Zero, and I think this is really when it started to go off the rails. I mean, I guess you could make an argument for Spiral, but that's kind of an outlier because Ring 2 was superior, like we had said. But I think Ring Zero, that is really kind of when things started to go off the rails a little bit here. And so you'd seen this before, obviously. So how did this viewing compare to your other viewings of it? Anything you noticed this time? Any different opinions you formed?
I watched it again. I actually watched it again today just to keep, I always do that whenever I'm going to be on your show. I watch it like a week or two before, and then I watch it the day of to make certain my mind is totally on the subject. And something I did notice uh, to this watching just today is that in many ways, this really didn't come off as a Ring book. It almost came off as a Ring throw in at the end. If you had taken out the finale with the established setup at the Ring at the very end of the movie and had ended it just slightly different, would it matter if Sadako was named Namiko or something like that? It really doesn't come off as a Ring story, despite having connection to Lemon Heart. Don't really use much of it either. But the problem is that it's also unnecessarily complicated for no reason. They could have made this a very easy, interesting story, and they decided to make it very complicated for no possible good reason. The whole story about it It just doesn't feel like a Ring story, to be honest. Even if you'd only seen Ring and Ring 2 or just the American versions, and you were told this is connected, you'd be like, well, I guess it was at the end. That was, I mean, I get it that they tried to tie in moments from the first movie about the history and the setup, but they did it in such a way that it was very, it's almost heavy-handed. It wasn't well done. It was like, it reminded me another series that was had this happen a few times is the Hellraiser series, the Clive Barker series. The people that owned it, New Direction, whatever the heck the old company was called, they had to keep it, so they had to make movies using the characters so they could hold on to the rights. So they would take these extra scripts and throw Pinhead in as part of the story. They'd weave it in, and it never works. It's always terrible. Even when one of them had Henry Cavill as one of the main characters, it just does not come off as a good movie, and it doesn't come off as an interesting movie. This movie, although it had some good moments, I will say this, it had some really good moments at times. It didn't come off as a Ring story.
So I think you're right about all that. And yeah, I definitely got that sense a few times watching this. Like there are a few thoughts that I was thinking of. I mean, first off, I thought, Yukie Nakama does a pretty decent job with what she's given as an actress. And, but I did feel a whole lot of time that this kind of feels like you're trying to give Sadako almost a Carrie-esque origin story. I mean, even with like the way this like kind of demure way that she dresses, and there's some interesting stuff that they kind of touch on at different parts in here. I mean, you've got this, she's with this theater troupe, and the director is obviously this kind of sexual predator who is preying on the main actresses, right? He does that. He comes to her apartment and he says like, "Oh, I can make you a star" and all that, and it's pretty obviously what he's suggesting at, and it's not as blatant, but it's also kind of suggested that he was doing this with this previous main actress, Aiko, who is like the first victim of sorts. Um, and I thought the stuff with Sadako's mother, she was also very, creepy. Like the scene, the flashback scene when the teacher goes to the house and sees the mother just like kind of staring into the mirror like that, which is, we saw part of in the famous Ring videotape. Very creepy there. And that was played by Masako in that. I thought she did a great job in just that little bit of scene. And I'm just like, okay, this is something a little bit more interesting. And I think probably the most interesting thing about the biggest question mark I think most people had about Sadako after watching the first movie is who the fuck is her dad, right? Because that's this whole thing that's going on. And obviously in the books, it is this Dr. Ikuma, but in the movies it's implied that it's something else, but they don't. Then they touch on it one time when Ikuma comes in. He mentions that, Sadako, the other Sadako, which I'll get into that part too, takes after her real father. And I'm just like, well, that's the question I want answer. Who the hell is this bitch's real father? I don't care about all this other stuff.
Right. It really the implication is that the father is some kind of like sea spirit or sea demon or something like that. And it's implied even in the books a little, it's suggested that that's the possibility, but the problem is that it's except for the moments at the very beginning where they're saying, well, Sadako didn't want to go in the water because she knew it was, she would say she knows what's there and all of that. Go on, tell me more. That was where the story should have gone. Instead, we got this, as you were saying, it's like a Carrie story where, she's got the predatory people and they're treating her badly and she's getting, snarled at, and she's so sweet and innocent and soft spoken and dressing so demurely. And they tried way too hard with that. Plus, you look, if you're going to do a Carrie story, one of the highlights of Carrie was that even when she looked good, she was always going to be less than the pretty girl. Now, Sissy Spacek, believe me, was a beautiful woman, but Carrie was always written in the books and in the stories as plain for many reasons, and that's fine. That's the setup that Stephen King got from the past because he knew two girls who were like that in real life, who had that kind of weird upbringing as well as the negative connotations on their looks and the way they dressed. If you're going to do a story like that with a predator, it, it's better when you have somebody who doesn't, you know, who doesn't overplay the demure part. If you're going to play it so demure, it's like it's screamingly obvious to everybody what's going on, and the actress is stunningly gorgeous. And even in the demure outfit, they didn't hide her curves or anything, so it made it even less believable at times. If you really, the actress who is still stunningly gorgeous in her own way, who played the costume girl, would have been better in the part of this, in the sense of looks wise, just on the sense that she's not as stunningly gorgeous in her own way, but she's not movie gorgeous. I mean, if she walked into any room anywhere else, she'd be the most gorgeous woman in the world. In a theatrical setup, she's supposed to be the plain one, which is always hysterical in my mind. But they missed the boat there, and they were trying so hard to do all this work with this very ridiculous theater company that came off as actually it came off a little cartoonish at times. That was my problem, really.
Yeah, I didn't really have much time for the whole theater stuff outside of the director thing, which would have been interesting for how Sadako's powers or whatever are activated here in, like, as a self-defense mechanism. That would have been very interesting. But this whole focus on this weird love triangle she has with Toyama and the costume girl Etsuko. Um, I was not here for any of that, and it just wasn't interesting at all to me. And I'm just kind of like, it really felt like we're just kind of spinning our wheels and we're trying to fill time to meet that 90-minute time limit here. But overall, like, it is just very disappointing. And you're right too, going back to what you said earlier, it doesn't really, until we get to the end sequence, there doesn't really feel like a lot of connection the to the first movie. It's an I mean, when we open up with this reporter who's going through, at that point I thought, okay, we're going to go through and see this reporter, but also then we also have this weird introduction, this weird prologue with the girl watching the cursed videotape, and then we jump into 30 years in the past, and that just feels like completely disconnected from the rest. It's like, oh, we have to remind you what we were doing here at the beginning.
Right. And that made it very problematic for me. I mean, when I first saw it, the first time I saw it, and they had the two girls talking about the videotape on the phone, I'm thinking, okay, we're going to play a lot along with that and maybe digress a bit and kind of show some of the setup. But one of the other issues I had with that was that um, it just dropped that whole sequence there when they're still talking about it. It was like, okay, that's just to tell you we're here. We're just starting it out, and then we're never going to mention it again. They don't mention the videotape. They don't mention the reason the videotape became so dangerous. The reporter at the beginning, they sort of tell you the reason she's so pursuing Sadako, but then it becomes almost demented in the way they did it after that. It, like, it was a movie that was kind of written by, it felt like it was written by committee to me. I know one person has the name on it, but it felt like they were saying, okay, You have this script of a girl who's being harassed who might have telekinetic powers in a theater company. Let's take her and say that she was originally Sadako and she's divided in half, which still doesn't make any sense to me. There's no setup for that whatsoever. Two Sadakos.
Yeah, we'll get to the two Sadakos part. But first we're gonna jump to an ad break, so we'll be right back after this.
Do you try to watch all the new movies on opening night? Or maybe you only see a few but always like to hear the reviews? On the Real Talk Film Podcast, every 2 weeks we discuss the new releases in cinemas or on streaming. I'm Sam Stokes, and each episode I'm joined by one or two brilliant guests to talk about the latest films and their reception, direction, story, performances, cinematography, music, and more. Real Talk is a Film Stories Network podcast, so you can check us out on filmstories.co.uk, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other major podcast providers. Buy your popcorn, take a seat, and listen to the Real Talk Film Podcast.
And we're back. So, yeah, that let's talk about the two Sadakos part, because I literally wrote down in my notes two Sadakos WTF, because this is just completely bonkers. And I feel like one of the biggest problems of many problems with this movie is this idea of the best thing about the original Ring was how little we saw of Sadako. And the whole fact, and I think even as much as I do love the Ring, I thought that the stuff with Samara, like seeing her in the, when she's in the institution, and seeing her, be talking and saying, like, talking about how she wants to punish people and all that, like, DeVay Chase was very creepy in that. She did a very good job selling that. But one of the things I think that the Japanese version did in a superior way was we don't see anything about Sadako. We have no idea about her motivations. We have no idea about her intentions. We don't even really know if she is intentionally killing people or if it's just something else that's driving her. We don't even see her face, right? The entire time. She is just a completely mysterious entity. And there's always, when you do these kind of origin stories, and in some cases it can work well, right? There are ways where you show us why the villain is the villain, and it gives us a better understanding of their character, and we gotta get a sense of, okay, I don't agree with what this character does, but I can understand why they did it, right? So, for example, I mean, Magneto is the perfect example of that, right? Knowing his backstory as a Holocaust survivor and all that really informs a lot of his character. And the Magneto Testament graphic novel is an amazing piece of literature. But when you're doing a horror story, I think if you delve too much into who is this villain, you're kind of taking something away from what makes the villain work so well in the first place.
Absolutely. And I can give you the best example of that. The first Halloween movie, the John Carpenter movie, is one of the most frightening movies ever made. The music, the setup, the movement, the lack of reason that this is all happening made that so terrifying that it worked on many, many levels. Years later, I saw a version of it with my mother. It was on regular TV, and they cut out some of the more graphic horror moments, but they added a tiny bit of stuff that just added to the story, like Donald Pleasance arguing with somebody about not moving him and all of that, little tiny bits. It came off just as terrifying because we don't know why Michael Myers is like this. He killed his sister when he's a little kid in a clown costume. We have no reason why. There's no purpose in reason why. That made him more terrifying. The best part of that came from Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It, we don't have to see all the stuff Norman went through to become Norman Bates' mom, Norman Bates' mom. Just the way it all came off with just giving us this much information about Norman and his mom. One of the most frightening movies of its time, still pretty amazing to this day. When you try to explain too much about horror, it doesn't have anything to it. Horror needs imagination. If you don't build it up inside you, you're not getting anywhere. Reading Stephen King's Cujo, everybody that knows the dog, you hear it, it's little, oh my God, it's real to you. You know what it is. You're experiencing the horror of the moment. The fact that they never to this day, even with two books, explained in Stephen King's The Shining and Dr. Sleep why this hotel is so horrible and evil and full of ghosts and all of that stuff, made The Shining powerful to you. Ring. We don't know much about Sadako. We see all this weird stuff. We even got a tiny bit of explanation from the grandfather of what could have happened here, but it's so minor and so small that it never takes away from the moment Sadako really appears to us. When she comes, that end sequence where the only moment we really experience her, she scared nations of people. When you start telling me, well, she got this way because she had this, and this happened to her, and then this happened to her, and then this happened to her, all right. It stopped being fun to me. That's why the first two Hellraiser movies were so good. We really didn't get a lot of details on what happened. We got some, but we really didn't get much. And then after that, they kept explaining things. It became garbage.
Yeah, and we never even really knew what the deal was behind, Pinhead and all the others. In fact, they didn't even have any names, right? Pinhead was the fan name given to him.
Right. Clive Barker hates that name.
Oh, really?
He freaks out when you say that name around him. He freaks out. It's the Hell Priest. But he goes absolutely bonkers over that name for some reason. I personally find it hilarious.
Mhm.
I don't think that Doug Jones has any problem. Doug Bradley, excuse me, has any problem with that at all. But that to him is like like holding up the crucifix to Dracula.
Yeah. But going to the two Sadako things, I think that this was a case of they were trying to do two things, right? They were trying to do two things at once, right? They knew that I think they knew that telling this origin story of Sadako was a big risk, and you are sapping the horror element of the mystery that makes it so effective. And I think they knew that, and I think that's why they have this bizarre there are two Sadakos thing, because they're trying to say like, oh, this other version of Sadako, she's the mystery one. So we still get to preserve the mystery in a sense, but I'm like, if you're gonna go that route, then just have the Yukie Nakama character just be someone different who, has this spiritual kinship or something to Sadako, and then she gets possessed by Sadako or something like that. And I think that would have been a little bit more effective than this idea of at some point Sadako split in two, and Ikuma keeps the evil Sadako a little girl with drugs somehow, which again is this throwaway line, and it comes out of nowhere. And I don't know. At first, my thought was, I wonder if they're trying to capitalize off the success of the American version with, the whole idea of it being a little girl in that one. But this came out, like 2 years before the American version. So it wasn't that. So I have no idea where this idea came from. I'm not sure if there's anything about it in the short story or any of the books that you've read. So you're shaking your head. So I'm guessing no.
No, the story in Lemon Heart has Sadako being reborn, but it doesn't have this whole split Sadako, two Sadako nonsense that they threw in there. I mean, it came off, honestly, to me, the first time I saw it years ago, is like, what was that, twins? It's like, the way it was done, it was so heavy-handed and so badly done that it took away anything that, oh, now there's two, but now there's one. It's like, it's like you've taken out any reason for this to be actually scary to me. Okay, she can kill people now again. Big whoop. You can get that from a Freddy Krueger movie. At least you get a couple of laughs out of that.
Well, and to that point too, I mean, in the Freddy Krueger stuff, they don't go too deep in the explanation, right? You know that he was this child predator who got killed by a mob, and that's all we get about him. We don't know how that ended up transforming him into a dream demon or anything like that. And thankfully we haven't gotten that. And I feel like that's something they lost sight of. Especially, it's weird too, because you see this poster image for Ring 0, and if anyone hasn't seen it, you've got it looks like it's like these twin fetuses, where one is like a regular, baby fetus, and the other one, it's like this. Frank's holding up the cover right now, and the other one, it's like this weird discolored blob. So I guess that's supposed to imply the twins there, but it just doesn't. It doesn't, like, that's a striking image, and it doesn't come up at all in the movie, really. And I'm just like, that would have been because that was actually one of the things that intrigued me about this movie to begin with, was that cover image I saw when I saw it in the video store. And so then to go into it and see that it's just basically, there's nothing about that except when it gets tacked on at the end. It doesn't work that well at all. I also don't understand how the whole idea of, I mean, how come, because Sadako grew up with Ikuma, right? That's my understanding. So how come she doesn't know that she had this twin whose growth was stunted the entire time? All of that just seems very bizarre.
No, in fact, there was time they could have done it. She's sitting on a doctor's couch talking about her past, her feelings, or this, or that. None of that even was hinted. They honestly, that's why they say that they based it on Lemonheart. It doesn't feel that way to me. I think it was honestly another idea, and they tacked Ring into it because it feels very tacked on. And the ending, I know Kuma was in Ring, and all of that, and in scenes of the other. It just doesn't come off as realistic. It doesn't come off as part of the story. And you by the time people start getting killed by Sadako at the end, you're like, all right, well, all right, I guess so. There was only one moment I actually found a little bit of, just, I guess you could call it terror or fear or some kind of visceral reaction, was when the nice Sadako was about to be attacked by the fellow actors in the acting troupe. That setup of the mob mentality and the fear and all of that came off okay. Didn't come off as a Ring movie, but it came off as a good, frightening kind of moment that built to a proper climax that went the horror route. The rest of the movie after that, just like, really? I didn't find anything particularly scary about the movie. Other than that moment, I really did appreciate that. And the very ending felt the most tacked on of them all. The very ending, Sadako has this moment where she's back with Toyama, and she's happy, and she's in bed, and she reaches for Toyama, and she's in the well.
Yeah.
And they're covering.
No, I agree with all of that. And, the thing that creeped me out the most was that, again, that scene when the teacher finds the mother staring in the mirror, and I'm just like, okay, this would have been something more interesting to talk about. Also, too, do you know about Chizuko Mifune?
Not too much.
Okay, so Chizuko Mifune, for anyone who doesn't know, she was this purported psychic back in the Meiji era, and she had and it was this doctor who was very obsessed. He believed that she was real, and he had gotten this whole demonstration thing, and basically it looked like the demonstration was, completely staged. And so she was exposed as a fraud, and then shortly after she committed suicide. And this person, this woman's history seems very much a source of influence on Sadako's mother, which I thought would have been a much more interesting route to take. Is instead of going into Sadako, go into the mother, and how like Ikuma is taking advantage of her, or is like, doing unethical things, or because, make that guy the real villain of it, and then explore that way. You would keep Sadako's mystery, but you would also have a little bit more of an interesting story about her mother, and you would get a prequel aspect of it in there. And I think that would have made for a more interesting story, especially when you think about, how this doctor basically drove her to commit suicide with the whole fraud aspect too. So I mean, you have that aspect of manipulation, a powerful man manipulating a vulnerable woman, which again, you also have that too in the case of the director and the actresses too. There are ways to tie these things together, but the way they do this here, it's just very haphazard, and they just don't feel like they're really putting much doesn't feel like they're really putting much effort forth at all.
I agree with that entirely. I'd heard the name that you mentioned because it's mentioned in articles about the setup of the story, which follows along those lines of the uh, what Sadako came from in the books. But I wasn't totally aware that there was that detail. I really didn't know that much. I just knew that they said something, probably in an article here or there, that something similar to this happened. That's the setup of the book right there. The whole, she was supposed to be really good. The mother was really good at this stuff, and then just had this moment where she kind of freaked out and lost it in front of reporters, and everything went downhill, and she did kill herself, which really would have been a great story because it would have had a very young Sadako reacting as she did in even the first movie, where she kills the reporter, which is the setup of Ring Zero, actually. She kills the reporter because affecting her mother. It would have been a great thing because Sadako could have remained in the background and then become a really horror moment as the buildup. When the mother is losing it, Sadako starts reacting, and then everything could go to hell and be really interesting. And that would set up other stories, as well as even she has this thing, maybe runs away and then becomes part of the acting troupe, which is in the books, but suppresses it, and then it could come out again through the director's predatory behavior. This stuff could have been really well done, but instead, everything was very thrown together, very haphazard, as you said, very tacked on, and it doesn't come off as a very good story because of it. And honestly, I just don't buy the actress, who was stunningly gorgeous, to be Sadako. I just don't. She doesn't come off in any moment, even when the powers appear, as particularly anything to me. It's like she doesn't react properly to it. I mean, if she's the victim of it in her own way, why isn't she reacting like a victim? She's reacting almost secretive, making it worse.
Yeah, I thought that Nakama did a decent job in the role, but I think you're right. I think that she doesn't really feel like Sadako. I think that's down to, I think, the writing more than anything else. I thought her performance was the only thing really that kept me interested throughout most of it, because most of this movie is actually kind of a bore. Like I said, the
Oh,
whole
God,
love
yes.
triangle thing is just, completely uninteresting. I don't really care at all about Toyama. Um, it feels like they're trying to imply that she's, subconsciously manipulating him in some way, or like, somehow, getting, charming him subconsciously. But that never really, it seems like that at the beginning for like a moment, but then that just seems like every time it seems like they are forgetting about the stuff they're doing. They set up this stuff and it just kind of disappears. Like you mentioned the psychiatrist thing at the beginning. I completely forgot about the psychiatrist scene because it's like nothing. It has no impact at all on this. And yeah, a lot of this stuff and again, talking about the mother, and I think that would have also been a good chance to maybe show a different side of this, because that scene, when we see that flashback when Sadako kills the reporter at the demonstration, it's portrayed in a malevolent way. But what you were saying just now, like, she's defending her mom, really. So you could have flipped that around and had like the mother be the main character who sees her daughter, doing this very natural thing of trying to protect her mother, but in a completely discordant way. And we could have seen like the mother's descent into madness from all this. All of that would have been, even just saying that, I'm much more interested in seeing that than what we got here. But yeah, it just feels like they wanted to give this origin story for Sadako, but they didn't really think it through at all. And I feel like at some point in production, it feels like they realize, oh shit, we're about to take the mystery out of this character, so let's throw in an evil twin.
You're so right. And you mentioned the whole love triangle. Part of making a good love triangle is actually having chemistry between the actors. Chemistry between actors is sometimes forgotten. You can set up as many things as you like and say A is supposed to be attracted to B. But if they have no on-screen chemistry, it comes off very artificial. And in this situation, all three of the triangle came off as disconnected characters. I saw between the costume girl, whose name I always forget, and Toyama, no chemistry. They came off almost as brother and sister the way they were talking at each other. Between Sadako and Toyama, no chemistry whatsoever. What I did like is at the first part of the movie is when everybody's almost suspicious of her. She's pretty and she's quiet, but there's something wrong there. They're all, and the lead actress hates her because she's pretty and probably going to take her role because the predator is looking at her. That was also a good idea. Never went anywhere with that either. Everybody started being, all right, well, she's pretty. She's nice. She's sweet. And you really got to build that properly. I always use the example of an old TV show from the United States, real garbage one, called Dawson's Creek. And the setup in Dawson's Creek is Dawson is the main character, and this girl, Joey, played by Katie Holmes, is supposed to be his love interest, and they had no chemistry whatsoever. It was actually hard to watch. Whereas Katie Holmes was actually in love with and dating Joshua Jackson, the comic sidekick. When they brought them together, the heat was so much, people thought they were really dating again because it was real. They had dated. They first love kind of thing, really powerful on-screen chemistry. You see that, you feel that. You can feel that in movies and TV shows across the world. The Time I Met Your Mother, or whatever the hell the name of that show is, that
How I Met Your Mother.
Forever. And How I Met Your Mother, which there's a Saturday Night Live ending to that is the funniest thing going, where the kids start yelling at the father. We've sat here for 7 years listening to you talking about all the
That was
stuff
actually no, that was actually a promo for the last season.
Really?
Yeah,
I thought it was Saturday Night Live.
No, that was a promo they did for the last season because there's the actors who played the kids, right? They had obviously grown up, and after like the first 2 seasons, they just kept flashing back to a bunch of reaction shots they shot early on. But then when they'd grown up, then they had this idea of doing this promo for the final season where the kids have been sitting on the couch for 9 years,
9 years, whatever.
And they're like,
they're like,
it's time to wrap this up. Yeah, that was something that was an actual official promo.
And that was a brilliant promo. But the point is, Ted is supposed to be in love with Robin. Zero chemistry. What did they do? They cut that out, bring it back, whatever. I didn't watch that much of the show. Gail, my late wife, and I tried watching it for a while, and it's like, this is supposed to be funny. You know, we get that, we had that visceral reaction where, all right, I see that is kind of funny, but I'm not watching this.
Well, we're gonna have to fight afterwards because I love that show, except for the last season. The last season was
That's
terrible.
fine. I am not a person who believes that my opinions matter at all. One of the things that I say to people, and you've known me a long time, is if you love something, that's awesome. I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're wrong. And I like things that people look at me and like, really? You watch those movies? You watch those, read those books? That's cool. It's one of those things is I believe that evangelical fever some people have, like Star Trek versus Star Wars. I'll sit and watch and shut up. That's what I say all the time. There are moments I will tell you that when I see it on Facebook, sequences from How I Met Your Mother, there are sequences that I will sit through and watch nonstop, especially anything involving people slapping each other, because those slap bets are something my friends and I used to do. So I actually get a kick out of that. But the point is, when you have chemistry on screen, it raises the story. When you don't, and in this case, there was none, except for the director who came off as wonderfully predatory. Not a good person, but a really disgusting predator that really made that part of him work. It made it false. And when you have that, when what's her name again? The costume woman, I've missed her name every time. Etsuko. When she starts playing the sequence of the where the mother breaks down on camera in front of all the reporters, over that, it just came off very fake. Like, all right, you know, we saw this coming from space. It wasn't that fun.
No, I agree with that. And yeah, that's especially because you have so much set up here for so much other things, like the reporter's investigation, the predatory director, the mother's history, all of this, the psychiatrist, even all of this other stuff that is set up, and it gets shoved into the background to focus on this love triangle that has zero heat whatsoever. And you're right, they don't have any chemistry. Honestly, I think I would have been much more interested, and it would have been a much probably would not have flown in, 2000 Japan, but Sadako and Etsuko probably would have had more chemistry together than Sadako and Toyama, or Etsuko and Toyama. And that would have made for something a little bit more interesting too, is, the, discrimination and all that, especially with a predatory director on here. I think that would have made it a lot more interesting.
Would have made it fantastic. I hadn't even considered that, but now that when minute you said it, it's like that's the first time I thought Etsuko's character actually had anything interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When you just said that totally changes the whole dynamic, where Toyama almost becomes a secondary predator in the story.
Yeah, that would have made it more interesting.
That would give him more meat.
Mm-hmm.
And that would make the final sequences so much more powerful, where it almost would add a societal element to it that would make this so much more interesting. That the example I'm coming up in my head was the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie was really more of a story about a person who's gay, but suppressing it so deeply inside that it's coming out in bad or negative connotations. And it actually comes off as realistic at times, even when the horror gets a little silly or some of the characters dress really ridiculously. There's a element of reality to somebody who is living in fear of who they are in a public that won't accept it. Doing that with Ring Zero would have raised that to a whole different level. It would have made the story so much more interesting to watch, because then Toyama would be the one playing something that would hurt both Etsuko and Sadako at the same time. and it would hit them both on different levels. You know, it would have been like, oh my God, I didn't know the one I love murdered somebody. Etsuko would have had a whole moment where her fear of what she just found out could have actually affected Sadako in a way that made her not believe in her. And now you're against me too. Now I become more evil, kind of thing. I would have bought that. So that actually made me interested in the story.
And you could have also paralleled that with the mother and the societal oppression she experienced with the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's got this ability that is being, you know, weaponized or exploited. That would have been a lot more, again, you would have that parallel there too. And again, this would have made for a lot more interesting story. Or even if you just focus on the reporter and what, you know, her feelings about all this and all that, but that's just very touched on upon. In fact, I didn't even realize that it was the reporter until I got bored with the love triangle stuff and I started scrolling through information about the movie and I'm like, oh, it's the reporter's wife. Okay, I see now.
That's how I found out.
Yeah, because
I'm not joking. The first time I watched it, I turned onto Wikipedia to figure out who half of these characters are. I hate to have to say that, but I was so bored and thrown and all. I still bought it because I'm that kind of a crazy person, but I was sitting there and I had to actually pull up Wikipedia because I didn't remember half of the characters.
No, exactly. I had the same exact thing. And yeah, this is just so much of this just does not fit together in the way that it should. And I think that's really kind of like the final word to have on this movie is it's just a big bore, and it's a disappointment with how much stuff they could have done, because you do have good performers in this. Yukie Nakama is a good actress. Kumiko Aso, who plays Etsuko, is a good actress, right? She was in Pulse, talking about Pulse, right?
Pulse, and she was so good and so gorgeous in Pulse. And I mean, they're honestly, I didn't have really a problem with any of the actors in it. The Toyama came off as a little bit too much of the pretty boy acting, where he's letting his looks more do the acting rather than the actual acting. Most of the people in it actually did what they could with what they had. It's just that what they had wasn't that worth it.
Well, even the doctor, Daisuke Ban, he's also, you know, suitably creepy and everything. And we mentioned the director too, the guy who plays the Takeshi Wakamatsu, you know, comes off as authentically creepy throughout this entire thing. There are good performances in here, but it's just they just don't. The story is not doing them any favors whatsoever.
Not at all. And it's sad because there's just you and I talking about it for, you know, an hour or so here. We came up with 4 different directions off the top of our head that would have made it much more enjoyable to watch, as well as keep the horror in it. I mean, the T-shirt I'm wearing, you know, do you read Sutter Kane? I know it's backwards. And they never tell how Sutter Kane suddenly became this Lovecraftian god in there. They didn't need to. It was perfect in that fear element. They're trying so hard to give these explanations that it loses something. Then that's the reason that Ring Japanese versus Ring American, the Japanese comes off as more creepy and terrifying because we don't know why. We know why, and everything is explained and even found our way out. When we find the way out in Japanese version, it sets up a whole other area of horror that's internal to the Japanese people. It doesn't affect me as an American, but I understand it. And I felt it in my own white boy way.
And one other thing I just want to mention quickly here is just looking through the notes I had here. I thought some of the blocking in this movie was just very odd. Like the reporter, when she's talking to Ikuma's, you know, former student or protege or whatever, just like her blocking just felt very odd and like unnatural. And I'm not sure if it was the director, if it was the actress or what, but it felt extremely stiff. And also at the end, when Sadako merges with her evil twin, and I can't believe that's a sentence I just uttered, but that's what we're at here. And she's doing those kind of jerky movements. It came off as very unconvincing. Like, you compare it to when they had an actual contortionist doing it in the first movie, where it looks amazing. But here it just felt like it felt like it was kind of like sped up artificially, and it just didn't it did not have the same impact at all that the movements in the original movie had.
You're right. And part of the problem here is that they didn't give us anything new. We saw that before. When you see Sadako the first time for real, it's the end of the movie practically. By showing her from the beginning to the end in anything, you lose the power of the character. You become Jason Voorhees. Jason Voorhees is not a source of fear. It's a source of murder porn, to be honest with you. It's just, what way can he kill this person now? What bizarre death are we going to see? It's not a frightening thing anymore. When you have built the terror and show it in very small amount, our imagination makes it the terror. And that's more powerful.
I think that's a great note to end on. So yeah, I mean, final summation is that this really feels like the point when this franchise really started to go off the rails. Frank, thanks so much for coming on. And how about, would you like to tell people where they can find you?
I'm available on Amazon. My latest book, I'll show you a little bit here. My hardcover here. Caesar Now Be Still is my first mystery novel with Bellinger Books. American mystery set in the 1800s in New York, gangs of New York style. A lot of fun with that stuff. And that's the easiest way to find me, or in AmorosiMMA.com, where my martial arts school is.
Okay, great. We'll have links to that stuff in the show notes. As for us, JapanOnFilm.com is the website. We are Japan on Film on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. You can find us there. And as always, we are part of the Film Stories Podcast Network. So listen up after the credits to hear what's coming up next. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit JapanOnFilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on JapanOnFilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.